Greetings, YouTube. There's a discussion recently on a forum asking if firearms have a place in D&D 3.5 or Pathfinder, and I think they do. I don't have a problem with flintlocks or even percussion caps existing in the game. I think the technological level is up to that. It's, for the most part, slightly ahead of the Renaissance. So, smoke, matchlocks, wheel locks, flint locks, those are all should be all available without a problem. And again, I don't have a problem with even with percussion caps. In the past I've used firearms that were actually required a particular type of crystal to be used, and it was sort of an alchemical version of the piezoelectric effect, wherein if you strike a quartz crystal, you will get an electrical spark. And the treatment turned a particular kind of quartz crystal into one that, if you struck it with the hammer of a firearm, it would transmit a spark to the powder inside the weapon in question. So essentially, it played the part of a percussion cap or flintlock, and I think it was usable X number of times, depending on the quality of the crystal, that kind of thing. So that was something I used, and I did that because it meant that you could control the popularity of the weapons in question by the supply of crystals, and the rest of the firearm is well within the technological level of dwarves and gnomes and the goblins, who are all very good at tinkering and creating things, and of course then humans. You can also control the popularity of the firearms by, instead of using gunpowder, which is a purely chemical process, to using the alchemical smoke powder, which again, you can control that by making the ingredients difficult. It's more difficult. You have to have an alchemist make this stuff, so it's not just any guy who can get his hands on the chemicals in question, mix them in the right proportions, and corn the stuff properly and get gunpowder. No, you need an alchemist. So you restrict the frequency of you restrict the availability, and so firearms become something used by adventurers, by nobility, and by elite troops of nobles. So I don't have an issue with that. But one of the things that came up is the concept of penetration. Now, back in second edition, I had firearms, and we had penetration in the regard that it didn't necessarily have a ignoring armor class feature, but it had a exploding die feature, which kind of emulated penetration. Whereas in whatever the die of that weapon was, depending on what the weapon was, say it was a die 8, that if you got an 8, you got to die roll again. If you got another 8, you got to roll again. So you could potentially keep rolling until you ran out of 8s, and that told you how much damage. So it would be possible to blow through someone, literally do massive damage. They have to make a saving throw versus death. Now I don't think I necessarily want to use an exploding die again, but that definitely does allow fighter types to have an attack which is as powerful as some of the other ranged attacks in the game, for as far as the spellcasters. So that does help make them on par if you wanted to. But I do like the idea of having firearms being penetration, in the sense that they go through armor more efficiently. So they would be able to ignore a certain number of points of armor based on their die. So if you had like a die 4, you might have that armor, or a die 6. Die 4 is probably too small. Like a die 6, it would work on 1 point. Die 8 would work on 2 points. Die 10, you get the point. Something along those lines, because that helps to emulate that firearms are very good at penetrating armor. Armor was made that could handle firearms, but they had to slope it properly, and the ridge was remarkably thick near the end of the armor period to counteract. You really like not just well-formed heavy gauge armor, but you're almost to the point of just steel plates. You're armoring someone like a tank to keep them alive, which does impact their ability to move. Also, it was an era when you had less and less armor on the arms and the legs. So you might have had an armored skirt and a chest piece and a helmet. So you would have some less armor. So it balanced out a little bit. But some people were really arguing that they don't like the idea of penetration, of ignoring armor. Now, I even used ignoring armor for heavy crossbows, because heavy crossbows are slow. And I think you should get something for that. Not just the damage, but I think there should be some kind of balancing factor. Because they are so slow, you should get something extra to make them more attractive. So they're good at punching holes through monsters and heavily armored humanoid foes. And I think that's a good mechanism. It's a nice little balancing feature. It isn't hugely overpowered. Well, let's face it, we got lots of spells that ignore armor completely. They're touch attacks. So nobody seems to blink an eye at that. So having a crossbow or a firearm that ignored some armor, I think is readily acceptable. However, I do understand that there are those opposed to this, and I am open to hearing the interpretations of this situation from other people. So, do you think that firearms or crossbows that ignore some armor is imbalancing? And have you ever used exploding die? And do you think that's imbalancing? Do you think it was, say, more acceptable back in the era of 2nd edition? I never used it in 1st edition because we didn't usually use firearms in 2nd edition. 1st edition, rather. We did use Mark V blasters because I had him. One of my characters had a Mark V blaster that he got while he was in Gamma World. How it worked in a world of D&D, I don't know, but it did. So he carried a Mark V blaster strapped to his hip. It was awesome. But again, that's just a magic tack. So spells, it's basically put a magic attack in the hands of a ranger. This is back when rangers had, was it druid spells they had access to, and it wasn't many. So yeah, they weren't huge spellcasters. I can't remember. Was it magic? I can't remember what spells they got. But he didn't cast a lot of spells. I know that. But he was very much into just beating the crap out of things, particularly giants. Back in 1st edition, rangers were really good at killing giants. So tell me, what do you think about firearms and crossbows having an attack that ignores some armor or uses an explosive die? Let's have a conversation.